I had 3 young kids in the backseat of my car. They were drunk. I was bringing them home. They said, which cop are you? And I said, I'm Eggebraaten. And they're like, dude, are you the singer?
Today on Time We Discuss, I have Tim with me. Tim, thank you for joining me.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
Absolutely. So we have, you are a police chief, or you were a police chief, or you were, what is it?
I am retired. I'm retired 7.5 years ago already. And after 28 years in law enforcement, and yeah, the last 5.5 years, I was the police chief in Detroit Lakes, Minnesota, and shifted gears and loved it. It was a great career, but I love doing what I'm doing now too. So.
Awesome. So let's start at the beginning. When you obviously elevated your way up to chief, how did that all unfold for you in a nutshell?
Well, I knew in kindergarten I was going to be a cop, so that was a no-brainer. It was no question. I got into law enforcement, loved working the streets, and then sergeant was kind of like, I don't want to be a sergeant, but then I thought, well, maybe I will, and became sergeant, and then just from there, just kind of grew as the leadership grew. And then it was like, you know what, I think I could do this police chief job, and I think I'd do a good job at it. And so I threw my hat in the ring and got the gig, and it was awesome. Great staff and a wonderful team, and it was awesome.
That's awesome. So when you advance the different levels, so it's, you're I guess officer, and then sergeant, and then is there a lieutenant after that? And then chief, how does that work?
Yeah, at that time we just had patrol officers, and then sergeants, and then chief of police. So now they're doing some different things right now, but we had 3 sergeants, and then the police chief. So
okay,
I was sergeant for a long time, many years, and that was a good gig too.
Okay. So if someone wants to pursue law enforcement, do they need to necessarily go to college for that and get like a criminal justice degree? Can they go right into the academy right out of high school? What does that typically look like?
For the state of Minnesota, I don't know about the other states. Every state is different. But the state of Minnesota, you need at least a 2-year degree, associate's degree, or a 4-year bachelor degree. And now they shifted quite a bit, where they were focusing more on 4-year degrees, and then now it's kind of going back again because the pool of applicants is drying up. It's barely a puddle right now, and so they're not lowering the standards, but they're just saying, look, get your 2-year degree. If you want to advance anywhere, like become sergeant or get any leadership roles, most departments encourage a 4-year degree at that point. A lot of bigger departments, the police chiefs have their master's degrees or doctorates, and so it all kind of varies depending on the agency and the size of the department.
Okay. Now, from your experience, if someone is, again, entering into law enforcement, is there any kind of other life experiences that could take the place of education? So if they worked security for 5-10 years, something like that, or again, it varies from state to state, like you said. But from your experience, does that other experience count towards education, or no, you'd still need some form of education as well?
Yeah, in Minnesota, you need that education piece of it. But that being said, if you could do both, I was in corrections for 3 years, and that was huge. And I recommend, if even if you're in high school, if you're interested in law enforcement, maybe get a security job or work at something in that lane a little bit, where you're encountering or you get to know a little bit about what law enforcement entails. It wasn't until my junior year in college, when I did an internship, that I actually knew what the day-to-day workings of a police officer, what they even did. And I just knew I wanted to be a cop, but I didn't really understand what they did, so it was a little late to the game on that one.
So let's handle that for a second. So a typical day-to-day as a law enforcement officer, what's that typically like?
Well, the beauty of it is, why I liked it so much is there is no typical. And because I loved the idea of thinking on my feet, where I could literally go from helping somebody that locked their keys in their car, and I'm trying to get the car unlocked. I could go from that right to a burglary in progress or a heart attack victim, and you just never know. It could be a car accident. And so I love that. I thrived on that diversity of the job and having to think, like, make instant decisions and then live with those decisions, you know. And so that was tough too. It was mentally challenging, but it was I liked that fast pace and going. It seemed like every time we'd sit down on the night shift to get a bite to eat, we would get like 2 bites into our burger and we'd get called out. And the waitresses all knew us, you know, so we would just give them our plate with the burger, and we'd come back an hour later and they'd warm it up for us. And so I like that fast pace and then not knowing what the next call is going to be.
What about going up to sergeant? So pretty much everything I know about this is all from, the TV. I'm dating myself by saying TV. Is there like a sergeant's test involved? Is there additional training that goes along with that? How do you advance from your experience going from like an officer up to the sergeant level?
Yeah. So there's a civil service board, and the chief of police is involved too. And so there was a test, and there was some interview process, and then once you become sergeant, then there's training, leadership training, and it's always a challenging part because you're still kind of young, and a lot of the people you're supervising are older than you. They've had more experience, and so that was a really challenging transition going from patrol officer, and then I was a canine handler also, and then to get those sergeant stripes, and then it was like, oh my gosh, and now you have responsibility. And so I went to some trainings that really helped. Some were business trainings, which was really good too. But yeah, so there's that mix, and then it's just on the job training too, where you get one of the senior officers that pulls you aside and says, "Look here, kid, and this is how it's going to go," and you're just like, "Yep, you're not wrong," and so that part, just being willing to accept that you're not going to know everything, and you're not, there's no USB port to plug it in, and all of a sudden you know everything. It doesn't work that way, and it was a great challenge. That was one of the best moments in my career, those years being sergeant, plus having a dog. And so I was the night supervisor with a dog, and we would be the first to go out to these exciting, scary calls. And it was like, man, I felt like a kid in Disneyland. I mean, it was wonderful. Good gig.
Talking about being a canine handler, this made me think of this. So when I think of police officers, I have like a very, very rudimentary understanding of all the things that they could be doing. And mentioning the canine leads me to this. Are there different like specialists within law enforcement that you have? I know you might have like, and this might be more on a federal level, but you might have like negotiators. You have your canine handlers. Are there other specialists that people can then kind of form their own path and go down those roads? What does that look like?
Yeah, very much so. There's in smaller departments, we only had like 16 cops, so it was a smaller agency. So we had to wear all those hats, which was another part of the thrill, and where we would be the negotiators. If somebody was going to harm themselves, we would be the ones talking to them. So we were mental health, practitioners basically, on the street, and then canine, but like bigger departments, they have more specialized, where maybe you're working hit and run investigations and that's all you do, or homicide or sexual assault, or any kind of burglary, those kind of crimes. But like our department and most departments around the majority of them are 10 people or less, and so they're having to do all of that. And if there is a homicide, usually the states have some kind of a team that travels around the state that can come in, help you with the investigation. And because it's it's a huge undertaking to take on a homicide or a suspicious death. And, to have those resources at your disposal, to come in and help you with the investigation is critical. But yeah, and so there are a lot of hats to wear. And when we're interviewing people that are coming into law enforcement, a lot of people say, I want to be a canine handler. And it's like, well, that's a very narrow, area, but it's exciting. And I get why they want to do that. Or an investigator. I want to be a detective. And because that's fascinating, trying to get in the mind of the criminal and figure out who done it and what happened. And it's just part of that adrenaline, and it's exciting stuff.
Going down the road of like an investigator, and I also, something you said made me think of this too, like your state patrol officers. What's the path for those? Do you still enter like through education, police academy, and then go from there?
Yeah.
How do you then go to either of those paths?
Yeah, you start out like everybody else, and you get that experience, and you're on the road usually and taking calls, and then the people that advance are the ones that are naturally curious, and they ask good questions, and they kind of recognize they don't know everything, and they study, and it's just like school or any other job where, if you start out at the front office and you want an office in the back, with the beautiful view, well, you have to kind of work toward that, and you have to study, and you have to learn the other areas, and on your off time you work on that, and you develop those relationships, and you network with other people within your department and with other entities around you. You network, and you get to know other people, and get to know the powers that be, like the city council, or the overseers of what it is you're doing, and you just become a student of the game, and you learn it, and at first, there's no way. I told my friends, there's no way I'm gonna ever not work night shift. Night shift is where it's at, and I am never gonna work days, And then I started having kids, and it was like, oh, okay, the kids are in school. It'd be nice to be able to attend their events, but yeah, and like everything, when you get into that position and you're learning more about it, then you're like, I think I could do that, and you get more confidence, and then if you want to progress. Some people start as a patrol officer, or they start at the entry level wherever they're at, and they're content. They're happy being there, and because we need that too. Not everybody wants to be the boss, and it's different. It's lonely at the top, and but it's those challenges, and I love taking on those challenges and learning more about every area of the department.
You talked about, your working nights, and then you switched over to working days. How common is it for an officer's schedule, or a sergeant, or even a chief, for your schedule to be shifting around? Is it constantly shifting? Can you request, I want to work these 5 days? And obviously it's limited to your experience, but what is that like from a scheduling perspective?
That's tough too. In a smaller department, it's really challenging because, we had, when I started, we were working 5 days, 40 hours a week. And my days off, my weekends were Mondays and Tuesdays for 6.5 years. And I was all over the board. I'd work nights, days, afternoons, all over, because I was a relief shift. And I loved that. I chose that one. And they go by seniority. Most departments will go by seniority. So you can bid your shifts. You can request. A lot of people love working the night shift. They want to work nights. Some people request working days. Some like the afternoons. And so it depends on the agency and what but you have to know that when you're starting out in any job, that when you're the grunt working at the bottom, you have to recognize that there's people that have been there, done that. They've paid their dues. They've worked hard. And my daughter-in-law is a doctor, and there's nowhere that's more prevalent than in the medical world, where you go through college, and when you get your residency, they work you like 80, 90 hours a week, and they're like, well, I did it, you're gonna do it. And so when you go into that knowing that, that helps, I think, your mindset that, well, I'm gonna work weekends and nights and holidays, and it stinks, but it's also exciting. It's what I wanted to do forever, and so I recognized that and balanced it all out.
Now, before you talked about working in corrections, you were there for a short period of time, if I remember correctly.
3 years, yep.
Okay. Was that while you were going to school, or is that after school? I can't remember what you said about that.
It was right after college, and then so I went to police academy basically because I got my 4-year degree, and I started working in the jail. So when I started with the Detroit Lakes Police Department, I was 25, which is a little bit older than average of a brand new person starting out. And but I had those 3 years, and if I would have started in law enforcement at 22, I had a lot of immaturity that I needed to figure out, and so I had life experiences then at 25. A new dad, and so my perspective changed, and hopefully my perspective changes still every day. I want to keep learning, and I want to know what it's like. I want to know what it's like to be a podcast host, so things like that. I'm genuinely curious. I like to learn from other people's perspectives and figure out why they do what they do, and learn more about that.
It's interesting that you talk about your experience in the prison system, working in the prison system. I had another guest on several weeks ago at this point. By the time your video goes live, his would have gone live as well. But his experience was vastly different from yours. He found that it didn't give him any kind of mobility. Growth was very limited. But it sounds like in your experience, it was actually kind of the opposite. You were able to stay there for a short period of time, use that as a catalyst to then further your own career, which is really, really cool. Completely different perspective. I love that.
Yeah. And I believe, too, that, a lot of people will sit back and they'll wait for somebody to offer a hat for them to wear. And I'm of the mindset, well, invent a hat. Go to your bosses and suggest something like, what, I'm really good at doing this. We didn't have a canine program at all. There wasn't any canine program in the area here. And so I approached my chief. I said, I love dogs. They'd be a great tool, and so I went out and raised money, and the community was like all in on it. And so within a few weeks, we had all the money raised and started a canine program. And that was a hat that wasn't there. So I could have sat back and just said, well, I want to be a canine cop, and gimme. But a lot of times you have to go out and invent it, or at least make a pitch for it. You're not always going to get it, but at least make an effort and explain why it would benefit your company or your organization, and how is it going to help not only you personally and professionally, but how will it help the community and everybody around you?
That is awesome. I love that perspective. That is fantastic. Let's jump over to you as chief now. So, you worked your way up, you finally became chief. What was a typical day like for a chief?
A lot of meetings. I drove a desk, and it was, it was not much of a learning curve in the sense of leadership. But I learned quickly about like unions and policy, and, so that part of the management piece of leadership that goes with it, and a lot of city council meetings and learning. So the biggest transition for me was thinking more like, as a sergeant, I was thinking about my team and thinking about the patrol officers. And as chief of police, I had to think more globally within the department about the secretaries and the support staff and the investigators and everybody. But even more than that, I had to think about the 90-year-old woman that was on a fixed income that's paying our salary, and think community globally. And like the decisions that I'm making as police chief, I need to balance that with the benefits my officers are going to receive, with what am I asking of our community? Saying, okay, well, we need more police cars. Well, okay, well, why? And how much is that going to cost? And so that piece of thinking more globally, than it's more than just us as the police department. It's how are we going to best use these resources that we have to serve our community, to do what we're asked to do, and because they're our boss, our community is our boss. And so that was an interesting and challenging transition, thinking globally. And in the whole budget, I'm horrible with numbers, so I had like a $1.6 million budget, and I was like, what do I do with this? And then tapping into like our city finance director, and tapping into the people that know that, again, recognizing that I'm not going to know everything. Our city attorney, when it came to discipline issues or union questions, and so tapping into those resources that I had networked through the years and developed those relationships, and tapping into those was huge.
As a chief, are you, I don't want to say required, but I'm going to say required. Are you required to go to different public events where these other people would be present and you kind of network that way? How did you grow your network? What does that look like?
Yeah, I don't think it's a requirement, like as a mandate, but it's I would say I would agree with you. I think it is required that I love our community. This is a beautiful community of about 10,000 people. And so it was natural for me to want to get out there because I was the face of the police department. And when people had a concern or a question or a complaint, they didn't want to talk to the rookie police officer that was working the night shift. They want to talk to the boss. And so by going to community functions and flying the flag, so to speak, of, I was the face of the Detroit Lakes Police Department, and I respected that, and I made mistakes along the way, and I gave our city a black eye a couple of times, I'm sure, and by things that I would say or do, and learn from those mistakes, and but yeah, I dove into the community as soon as we moved here. I became a scout leader, and because I wanted to, and B, it was the right thing to do. And if you're going to be anywhere, you can sit back again and just be me, or you can get involved and use your skills and talents, and by doing that, then that's what builds your network too. And so then you're not just some random face like, oh yeah, you're the new police chief. And
before you talked about having to wear many hats because it was a small group of people that you had in your department there, and one of the things we talked about was like working with mental health and wearing that sort of a hat, which brings me to this question. As law enforcement officers, are you required to do any kind of continuing education type things and learning more as you continue to develop? What's that like?
Yeah, and we do. We have to every year or 2 years or 3 years, there's certain requirements mandated by the state. Some are federally mandated. And it seems like every year, and I've been out now for 7.5 years, and there's been a lot of changes from the public's perspective and a lot of media attention, and some of it's not new, some of it's just bigger, and so it seems like the mandates are becoming more and more, and like pursuit driving, you have to learn how to drive fast safely, and then there's use of force. When can I put handcuffs on, or what should be less than lethal? When can I use deadly force, and all of that. So those are just like. Plus, the officer has to know the laws. They have to know what they're enforcing out there if they're being proactive, and a lot of policies on now. There's body worn cameras, and they weren't around, or they were starting to come around when I was the police chief. We didn't have them. We had cameras in our police cars, and so all of these things that are coming around require training. When to turn them on, when do you turn them off, how long do we keep them, and so every aspect. And when you look at what a police officer does and what they're asked to do, it's a lot, and it's a heavy burden. That mental health expert, and anytime there's some use of force, rightfully so, there's scrutiny. People are going to look and analyze it. They analyze it within the department. The community's analyzing it. Was it appropriate? Could they have done something different? Should they have done something different? And so with every piece that they're doing, police officers, there's mandated training and firearms training. We train and shoot, and hopefully never ever have to do it. But it's a big part of the training. And so if you think of every aspect, then if you become specialized, like canine or investigations, then there's a whole new area of interviewing and interrogation techniques and rules in that, and best way to interview a person. And so it's never ending, but it's like life. It's hopefully we're never not learning something new. And podcasting. I mean, your podcast has changed every time you do it, because you're learning something and what not to ask and what to ask. And so it's hopefully that we're doing that in life. Hopefully it's every day is like, you know what? I goofed up yesterday. How do I prevent myself from making that same mistake again and then moving forward?
That's so true. That's so true. And just that we talk about the podcast, there's so many things that over the past several months I've learned, and I haven't necessarily my viewers haven't seen it yet because they haven't gone live yet. So it's very interesting, like that constant learning and changing and developing and evolving. It's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So Tim, you're also an entertainer and author. So let's switch gears and talk about that for a little bit. Let's stick with, I'll let you pick. What do you want to talk about first? You as an author or you as an entertainer?
Well, I started entertaining. We'll stick with that first because I started entertaining while I was a police officer, and I was a patrol sergeant, and we hired a one-man band for a neighborhood block party. And every song he was singing, I was like, I know that song. I've been playing guitar forever and singing, and then so then I bought some equipment and I started doing, but I was working nights and weekends, so I started doing some like birthday parties and entertaining and then it started to gain momentum where I was. Then when I worked in investigations during the days, my nights and weekends were available, and so I would get more gigs, and it was fun, and I was like learning things about music and that interaction. And what happened was it broke down a lot of barriers. People that would never approach me as a police officer, maybe they hated cops, they'd say, I hate cops, but dang, that's a nice guitar, and I love that song you just played. And so it broke down barriers, and I found myself like just expanding that networking again, and it was, but I loved doing it. And then like I'd get paid. The first time I got paid was I sang in a wedding, and they gave me $75 to sing in the wedding. I'm like, what? And it was amazing. And then just seeing people light up, when maybe they're having a crappy day, and I play a song that they're familiar with, and I can see them bobbing their head a little bit. And so to have that kind of impact on somebody, it started to generate more momentum. It's like, okay, I have the power, because I've been given a gift. I have the power to influence somebody's day, good, bad, or otherwise. And I take that power very personally, and I have a lot of respect for that. But I remember one of the first times it hit me that it was working. I had 3 young kids in the backseat of my car. They were drunk. I was bringing them home, and on the way they said, "Which cop are you?" And I said, "I'm Eggebraaten." And I was expecting Eggebraaten, I was expecting that, and they're like, "Dude, are you the singer?" And I was like, well, yes, I am, I guess. And they go, do you know any Johnny Cash? And I said, yeah, I know Johnny Cash. And it was awesome. And I thought, I made a connection with these 3 yahoos in the back of my car. And it was so cool. And then that just kept fueling it. And so then I took it, when I retired, I took it to the super next level, and I started speaking and sharing a positive message and speaking professionally and doing keynote messages around the country, and then I incorporate music into that, because that music has the power to make it memorable, and then everything just kind of transitioned, and people said, you got to write a book, man. And so I was like, well, and again, I'm learning, and I'm like, I've never written a book. How does that even work? And surround myself with people that can teach me how to be a better speaker, how to be a better presenter, how to get that message across, and what am I going to write about? How is that going to help people? And so I started writing, and it took me like 6 years to crank out the book, because I was in fear of what are people going to think, and blocking myself out. What if people don't like it? And I'm sure you get that. What if people don't see my podcast or listen, and you get into your own head. And so finally I got out of my own head, wrote the book, published it, and it came out like in February, I think, of this year. And I'm getting reactions from people literally around the world. And it's like, it's humbling and it's mind blowing all at the same time. Like, that something I'm doing, just like music or speaking or whatever, something like what you're doing, making a difference. You know, who knows who's going to listen to this? And so by you bringing in guests and picking their brains, and you know, who knows who's going to get a spark from that, and it could change the course of their life. And it's powerful. It's humbling, powerful, and crazy, all wrapped up into one clump.
Tim, you said so many things that I don't even know where to begin.
That's what I do. I talk.
I was speaking with an author, Alex Beaumont. By the time your video goes live, hers would have gone live. But we were talking about the combination of music and writing and how powerful those two things are combined. And then I was speaking with a yoga instructor recently as well, and we were talking about, she was saying a very similar thing about reaching people about what I'm doing, and kind of echoing what you were saying. You know, my goal is if I can just reach one person, if just one person sees one of these episodes and says, I hadn't considered that, that's great, I'm going to check that out, I'm going to avoid that, whatever, then I've done my job, you know?
Yeah, totally.
So, Tim, I am running a little bit short on time, so I'm going to give you like another minute or two if there's a cause you believe in, a project you're working on, if you want to talk more about your music, your books, anything like that. I'm going to give like another minute. The floor is yours.
Awesome. So the projects, you know, I think like I get involved with a lot of different organizations. In a couple of weeks, I'll be helping out a fundraiser for the Boys and Girls Club of America and our local chapter. And so each one, I'm humbled again by having an opportunity to help raise some money and awareness for the cause. And so like first responders and teachers and nurses and you know, so my causes are huge, and I don't have like one specific one, but I'm honored and humbled to work with all of these people and then learn more about their organization and tailor the message to reach them. And whether that's through the written word in my book or through a song that I make up about them or through stories and personal experiences, I'm all in on all of it.
That's awesome. So I'll make sure any links you want to send my way, I'll make sure I put them in the show notes. I'll put them in the description. I'll put them on the website so we can help support those causes. And Tim, I also want to extend, you know, a personal note. You know, thank you for everything you do. I know it's a hard job. Anytime there's any kind of an emergency, you know, we all want everyone on our side, whether it's EMS or the police or whoever. So I just want to send, you know, thank you for everything that you do and your people have done is awesome. It's been fantastic having you on Time We Discuss and learning about what it's like to be a police chief.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much.